So from art, we moved to housing. And when we thought about which asset class we would like to feature, we thought that housing would be the most important asset class. So the title of the panel is Solving Hong Kong Housing Crisis, and hopefully we will arrive to some conclusions. To help us do that, I would like to invite our ULI Asia Pacific Chairman, Nicholas Brooke, Sachin Doshi, founder and CEO of Weave Co-Living, and Donald Choi, CEO of ChinaChem, to the stage. Thank you.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Housing crisis. Let's really get into it if we can. I mean, the reality is that I think every major city faces challenges in providing a range of housing options and alternatives, particularly in the context of affordability and not least Hong Kong, as we all know. From my perspective, numerous suggestions, views and ideas have been tabled as to how Hong Kong could, and indeed might, restructure its housing policy. But the reality is, as we all know, the situation has deteriorated in the last few years, and we are, I would suggest, facing a crisis. So this is the purpose of the panel and why we want to talk to you today. Just a little bit on context, particularly for our overseas visitors. In Hong Kong, 52% of the population own their own home. So we're just over the 50% mark in terms of the number of families that own their own home. That's 1.25 million families own their own home. We have 400,000 families in home ownership units. These are units they bought on a subsidized purchase basis, still have something to pay if they want to move on. And then we have this anomaly in a way of 850,000 families in public sector housing, where ironically the waiting list is 5.5 years, and there's 300,000 families in the waiting list. So there's a big challenge even in the public sector. 7% of our land has been developed for housing, 7% of the land mass. 28% in total of the total land mass in Hong Kong has been developed, and 7% of that is being used to housing. So there's still a long way to go, if you like, in terms of supply. I mean, land supply obviously is a key issue. And we've had this major task force, as you know, looking at land supply. I don't want this necessarily to embark into a discussion about land supply. I mean, it is one of the issues. And some of the solutions that they're proposing would produce reasonably short and medium-term solutions, brownfield solutions, and using farmland in new territories. But the reality, and this is why we wanted to talk today, is the community is concerned about the next 3 to 5 years. Frankly, the FS's budget, the Financial Secretary's budget, which has just been issued, doesn't encourage us in any way. This year, the supply of land for new building, new housing, is down to 15,500 units, which is the lowest for 5 years. So again, we're not making ground. We're losing ground, and this is, I think, is the worry. We've seen some measures. We've seen government responding in some ways. We've now seen the change in the split, as you probably know, between public and private. This used to be 60-40. Now 70% of all new production will be public for rental and public for subsidized purchase, and 30% will be private sector. Those are the future production targets. We've seen adjustment in the HOS pricing. This is the price at which people buy subsidized units. It's now linked to a median family income. As a result, the adjustment has been increased from about 30%. You used to have to pay about 70% for those units. You now get an adjustment of about 47%, so you pay about 53% of market value. So yes, there have been some responses, and yes, we see in the budget, again, support for transitional housing. They're talking about supporting NGOs to build maybe 4,000 units and allocating about 500,000 Hong Kong to each of them to do it. So yes, there has been some response to the administration, but what we wanted to talk about today is the need for some brave decisions, if you like. We've been talking and plotting and planning before the panel, and what can be done to provide a sustainable and enduring solution. So that's really the agenda for our dialogue this afternoon. Just to introduce my panel very quickly, on my left I have Donald Choi, who's the CEO of the ChinaChem Group. I think I could rightly describe Donald as an industry veteran. He's worked in many geographies. He worked for a number of developers. Previously was the managing director of the Nang Fung Group, He's also a global ULI global trustee. And obviously he's going to bring us the developers and the designers' perspective on the challenge of meeting the, overcoming the crisis, if you like. And then on my right, I've got Sachin Doshi. He's the founder and CEO of Weave Co-Living, and he's the founder and chairman of Emerald Lake. He's a pioneer in collaborative living, and he's been very active in creating rental accommodation for millenniums and young professionals, which is a clear gap in the matrix here in Hong Kong. And interesting enough, he's just received support from Warburg Pincus. They've agreed to invest 181 million US in his efforts to expand co-living around the region. So clearly, they think he's got a key ingredient for success. So if we can, what I'd like to do is ask each of the panelists to spend 5-8 minutes setting out their stall, if I may put it that way, where they think that we could address, how we could address what we should do, where there are gaps and how we might fill those gaps, and then we'll go into some specific questions. So, Donald, would you like to go first?
Sure.
Thank you.
I think as Nick mentioned, we are facing a housing crisis in Hong Kong. I mean, Hong Kong housing is ranked the most unaffordable in the world for 9 straight years, not just this year, but for 9 straight years. Flats now cost about 20.9 years of annual income to buy. Rental in the private housing sector also is very expensive, forcing over 200,000 people to live in subdivided flats or cage homes, some of them in old industrial building with unsafe and unhealthy conditions. Recently, I think building nano flats has become a trend, some as small as 128 square feet. And that has been suggested as a solution to resolve the housing crisis. I beg to be different. The housing problem cannot be solved by the private sector alone. And building smaller and smaller flats is not the solution. We need to improve the quality of life in our city and not to actually deprive Hong Kongers from having a dignified life with adequate accommodation. Especially, I think, when Hong Kong population is rapidly aging. By 2034, 30% of our population will be 65 and over. I mean, with the financial resources that we have in our city, the influence of our society, can we continue to allow elderly to live in coffin-sized cage home and wait among the over 270,000 applicants waiting to get into affordable public rental housing? Now I think the waiting time is 5.5 years already. I mean, this is way longer than the government-owned target of 3 years. As the waiting time and the line get longer and longer, I think the government should be bolder to spend on their money on public housing program. Pushing the poor to the private sector market, obviously, it would be unaffordable for the applicants, that is waiting to get on the public housing. Therefore, I think I would suggest the Hong Kong government really need to increase our public expenditure on housing, which I think stand at about 6.6% at this moment, about $33 billion. When you compare to the infrastructure that the government is spending, they are spending 80% to build roads, bridges, to a certain extent, a lot of infrastructure that I think the latest targets and expenditure is over $100 billion. I think we should actually look at the livelihood issue first before we build so many infrastructure projects. And also, according to government-owned data, I think the future public housing supply in the next 5 years, they are well short of the government target, by up to 40%. So it doesn't matter if there is a policy to say I'm switching, from the 6:4 ratio to 70:30. That is only a target. If we are not going to achieve it, then it will remain a dream. Therefore, I think again we must spend more. We should actually think of new way of not only using government resources, but actually also involving the private sector, PPP or other form of getting the public resources into the private sector to help with the housing production and supply. Again, I think that is something that the society need to face, is that we are actually disfranchising a lot of the disadvantaged, underprivileged sector from the Hong Kong development, and we shouldn't do that.
Sachin, your view as to how we might address the situation?
Sure. Housing is a hot topic in this city, and everyone seems to have a view on it. If you hear the so-called experts, 3 months ago, people were talking about, prices going to crash 15% in the city. There's a lot of debate about sort of the amount of land supply that's going to come in. There are views around financing, but the fact of the matter that we all agree on is that Hong Kong has an unaffordability problem. The problem in this city, in my view, is as much about land supply as about supply of homes, as it is about the attitude of the city towards real estate as an investment. The fact of the matter is, for as long as I can recall, owning a home has been a phenomenal way in Hong Kong of creating wealth. If you look at 3, 5, 7, 10-year periods, barring maybe some exceptional periods where real estate prices have fallen, real estate has been a massive way for wealth creation generally in the city. It's been a big contributor to government revenues. It's been a big contributor to the city's GDP. But it's also been a big contributor to household wealth. What this has done is everyone collectively, and I think we're all responsible, has let the party to go on for a bit too long. Over the last few years, the government has clearly tried to, control prices in a certain way. They've put in place things like leverage restrictions, incremental stamp duty. But all that does, if you speak to an investor in relation to what that means, they just think, well, prices are rising so quickly, I'm just going to price this in. This is just a cost of doing a transaction. Because if I wait for 6 more months, the prices are going to move so much that buying 6 months ago with all that stamp duty is going to appear to be cheap. Having said all of this, I'm beginning to see a bit of a change in people's attitude towards ownership, especially when it comes to young people. That's the market that we target very closely at Weave. A lot of young people are saying, look, the median household price is 20 times median household income. It's going to take a university graduate 27 years if they save every single penny that they earn to be able to buy a place in Hong Kong, and that's if prices do not move from where they are today. So a lot of people are saying, you know what, I don't want to go and buy an asset that is severely overpriced. I don't want to be in this position where I'm going to be in this cycle of paying off my mortgage for the rest of my life, and this is going to mean that my lifestyle is going to suffer. A lot of young people are looking for flexibility. A lot of young people are looking for, how do they spend their resources on experiences, and how do they sort of connect more broadly with other people. There is also a natural extension of this. If you start, for example, with young people, I think a very obvious solution in my mind is having a thriving rental accommodation market. And it's not restricted to a certain demographic. I mean, it extends all the way, as Donald mentioned quite rightly. I mean, we also have a very aging city. A rental accommodation product or, traditional multifamily product, for example, could start from young people, single young professionals. They go into, say, co-living, for example, where they have their private space. They have other spaces that they can share so that they get a good quality lifestyle without having to compromise on that. When, say, for example, in a few years they get married, they move into a studio apartment, which is, again, a rental product. And as they build a family, through to old age, I think what the city needs is an ecosystem to encourage a thriving rental accommodation market. So if you look at the US, for example, there is huge institutional ownership of what they call the multifamily rental accommodation. 40% of all apartments in the US are institutionally owned. The market cap of listed REITs in the US that own apartments or single family homes is about $200 billion. What this tells me is if the planning works, if the prices of land work, there is no reason why the city cannot have a rental accommodation market. Part of the issue is, at least in my view, and Nick asked me to be controversial here, so I will be controversial here, is a lot of the land pricing in the city is geared towards developers. If you think about how a developer thinks about land and about doing a development, the period of time that their capital is at risk is very limited, which allows them to be a bit more aggressive when it comes to acquiring land because they're de-risking that investment very, very quickly. To be able to create a rental accommodation product, there's a few things that need to happen. Firstly, I think planning needs to be in such a way that there is land that is earmarked for rental accommodation. So you restrict the ability of whoever owns the land to be able to sell apartments or sell the entire project in its entirety. The land prices need to be rational such that, from an investor's perspective, there is that attraction, to being in this product because the yields from a long-term perspective make sense. And the banks also need to get with the program. I mean, we speak to banks on a relatively consistent basis. If you look at, long-term rental accommodation markets like the US, you can actually get 10-year interest-only financing. You go and speak to a bank in town here, they want to give you 3-year financing, maybe 5-year financing. In the 3rd year, you're going to start repaying your principal. Given where the yields are, oftentimes it just doesn't make sense anymore to go and borrow money from the bank because you're constantly going to be refinancing your obligations. So I think it's sort of 3 key things. One is, how does land pricing and land supply tie in with the needs of rental accommodation? How that ties in with how investors play in the space, whether that's bank financing, whether that's equity investors. And the third piece, frankly, is how do you continue to change the city's mindset towards ownership as opposed to renting? Because frankly, a lot of the government initiatives and all the talk that the government sort of has indulged in over the last few years, I think it's made the problem even worse. I don't think they're actually solving anything. I think they're making the housing problem even bigger.
Okay, thank you. I'll come back to co-sharing in a minute, if I may, as well. Donald, you talked about public-private and the need for cooperation, and we know in this town, as soon as public-private is suggested, the word collusion flashes up and people start jumping up and down. The reality, from your perspective, of public and private coming together, developers working with government, there's the farmland in new territories which potentially could be developed in partnership with government, and you could produce a certain percentage of affordable housing as part of the deal. We'd like to talk a bit about how the developers could and should respond, if you like, to the challenge.
Well, I think it's important to let the process be very open and transparent. Also, we should encourage competitions. Again, I think from a private sector point of view, for kind of the market to operate, obviously the best for any private individual is to monopolize the market. Then you have the power to negotiate the prices that you want and so on. But that is a very short-term kind of view. If the business is going to grow in the community need to actually grow with the private enterprises as well. In ChinaChem, we try to actually participate and do projects that could be a win-win-win situation. Not only we need to make a reasonable profit so that we have the resources to continue with our other projects, but also we should create a better environment, for the society, as well as kind of align our goal, the society goal, and the government all together. And competition is important because if the community understands there is competition, so any opportunities will be openly available to all to participate, then the collusion accusation will not stand.
And just focusing on the new territories and the farmland that could be developed in partnership if there was the will on both sides. I mean, do you think that's a real possibility, or is the government going to have to really threaten resumption and bring the stick to bear?
Well, I think if there is sufficient, incentive, then public sector will participate. But again, I think it should be left to the public sector to decide. I think we need to respect individual property rights, which is the fundamental principle for Hong Kong future. I don't think we can say it is for the public interest and therefore your properties become public assets. We cannot do that.
I mean, it's been suggested that perhaps up to 35% of the units might be built with affordability in mind. I mean, is that sort of formula something that developers would accept and agree to?
Well, I think depend on the location and so on. Obviously, different location will have different profit margin. So you cannot have one, standard for all sites. We need to look at individual sites where the value can be created. And then if there is excessive value, then we can have a formula where the government say, hey, let's share the part of that added value, with the community.
Sachin, co-sharing, obviously your core business and very, very successful. The role of co-sharing in Hong Kong? Opportunity for co-sharing?
Look, I mean, I obviously think the opportunity is huge. Very simply, I mean, if you look at, simply our target market, there's 1.2 million people, millennials in the city, potential residents who could live in, some sort of a co-living space. But even for a moment, if we ignore the numbers, the truth is a lot of young people and a lot of people generally, they spend a lot of time doing this and they do very little time doing this. How do you create spaces for people to come together, to share their experiences, and in a way enrich their life over and above just a place to live? So what, to me, sort of co-living, is a term that gets thrown about a little bit loosely, but the way we think about it, it is how do you create spaces where young people get private accommodation that is well designed, that is good value for money. It takes them away from having to deal with potential social issues of living at home with 4 other people, sharing one bathroom, usually bunking in a room with your sibling. You're a 25-year-old, you want to bring your girlfriend or your boyfriend over. You can't do that when your younger sister is sleeping upstairs. I mean, these are very simple things. A lot of the people that we speak to and who are residents with us, for them it is the first time they're moving out of their family home, or it's the first time they're living out of a student dorm. They're looking for a place that continues to enhance their lifestyle. Again, living at home, sharing a 400 square foot apartment with 4 other people. I mean, young people in Hong Kong already are co-living with their families without having any of the benefit of the community or any of the benefit of being able to interact with other young people. So I see, co-living as a concept can extend beyond just young professionals and millennials. There could equally be quite a thriving co-living product for the older demographic. Because again, what are the issues that a lot of old people face is a feeling of alienation and a feeling of loneliness, not having a social network around them. And co-living is a great way to address that. So in our properties, what we're basically doing is deconstructing the elements of a traditional home, so that the bedroom is our residents' private space. They have shared spaces on each of the floors where they can sort of get together and build a community within the floor. And then we have plenty of shared spaces throughout the building, creating avenues for them to get together without actually forcing them to get together. At the end of the day, it has to be organic. We have to provide the tools for them to get together. We have community teams that organize events. And it really is a lifestyle choice. And we go great pains to tell potential residents, if you're looking for the cheapest accommodation, that's not going to be us. If you're looking for quote unquote affordable luxury, but you're also looking for a lifestyle, a well-designed space where you want to contribute to the community, then you should come and live with us. We don't want co-living, or weave co-living at least, to be where young people go because they don't have a choice. We want them to come to us because this is the choice they make.
Thank you, thank you. One final question, because I'm very keen to make this proactive and throw it open to the audience, because I'm sure there are views and questions on housing from the audience. Let's suppose we are about to go and see Mrs. Lamb, and we've come to our conclusions today, and we've got a whole list of things we think she should do. What is the one thing, one fundamental thing you would say to, if you're going to solve this housing crisis, you should do? What do you think that the one fundamental thing is?
Well, I think we need to set our priorities straight. And again, when we have over 1.2 million people in our city living below the poverty line, doesn't matter how much private housing that we build, we are not going to help those people. So public housing, rental housing, or affordable rental housing, that is the key.
Your point you'd like to make to it?
My point would be get all their departments to speak to each other. We and not to get into details of some of the issues we've had, but you've got the FSD, saying one thing, the BD saying one thing, the HAD saying one thing, and it's like, guys, can I get all of you in a room, just fight it out and tell us what you want us to do? Because it almost feels as if the system is geared towards creating more hurdles for supply of housing. We're out there trying to create a solution that, frankly, oftentimes the government has just looked the other way, but the departments, rather than facilitating that, end up becoming a roadblock. And if the government is serious about solving the housing issues, they need to get their house in order, otherwise the issue is going to become even bigger. In my previous career, I used to actually work for a Dutch pension fund. And some of the things that the Netherlands has done, which I think is fantastic, is a lot of the older demographic, they don't want to stop working at the age of whatever they stop working at the age of in Hong Kong right now. People live longer, people are healthier for longer. They should have employment opportunities that continue to extend beyond what the current retirement age is. That is one way of doing it. Obviously, in Hong Kong, the MPF system doesn't really, create enough of a savings pool, off of which retired people can live. So the other model to look at is the Australian superannuation model, where I think it used to be 9%, it might be even higher, percentage of your income goes into a pool of capital that cannot be touched until you retire. So that does create some financial flexibility for people after they retire. But again, I think sometimes we expect the government to solve everything. The onus also has to be on individuals to save up for the future. But what it needs is a better established sort of pension or superannuation system, which doesn't quite exist in the city.
There's a solution also where you market life interests, or you take a capital sum, if you like, as against a rent, and that secures the future for the party concerned. So I think there are models that we could look at. Any thoughts?
Well, also, I'm an optimist in the sense that I believe that, we are looking at the problem with old technology and old way of living. Again, technology progress has gone beyond our imagination, in the recent years. The growth of productivity, through AI, through automation, through technology, will actually create wealth for the community and the society. There are some already talking about a basic income. Is it a possibility? We don't know. But obvious, is one of the options that we can investigate and look at how, together as, Hong Kong can actually create sufficient wealth and value for all the people in Hong Kong to share. And again, when I mentioned we have to look at the priority, because I think, on the poverty line, I think the problem right now we are facing is probably actually we are going backward. We are seeing intergenerational poverty again, which the previous public housing program has actually pulled or more or less eliminated that problem, and it gives hope to the society and the community move forward. Now we are at a loss. There is a helplessness. Doesn't matter how hard I work, I won't be able to afford, the accommodation. Therefore, my children will not have that type of quality of life that I want them to be. Therefore, I'm not going to have children, or, we are going to continue to be poor. So I think it's something that, there are crises and problems, but there are also different opportunities for us. And I think we need to make use of those opportunities, especially with the technology progress.
Thank you. Would you like to go first on
I think
public
when
supply?
we look at housing or employment and so on, we cannot look at it in isolation. We need to create an overall strategy, and hopefully we get it right. And again, if you look at Singapore, 80% of their population live in public housing. There's not a kind of problem with exploiting, cheap labor. So again, it's come with the policy. Do we need to raise our minimum wages? What are the benefit and also the disadvantages of that? I have employees come to us. I don't want to have a raise of my salary because I will get over the threshold and I won't be able to live in my public housing. I think that is not really the intention at all. I think we need to actually, first of all, give them a decent living, but also give them incentive to work.
When you talk about public, just clarification, are you talking about public rental, or are we talking about subsidized purchase as well?
Well, I think we need to solve the problem of public rental housing first, before we actually encourage ownership. I think we have so many people still waiting to get into the public rental market or that sector. And we are saying that, let's put part of that resources to build ownership flats. I don't think we are getting the priority right.
Sachin, too much liquidity?
Yeah, look, there certainly is. I think Hong Kong has consistently attracted a lot of capital. It is seen as a bit of a safe haven. There's no capital gains tax when it comes to real estate. The first property purchase any mainland investor or someone who's got a bit of cash is going to make is in Hong Kong. Absolutely. Look, I think these are all issues, but even before Hong Kong became what it became, it's not like property prices have been cheap. Like you said. Interest rates have, continued to drop, and the fact of the matter is that that's the environment we live in. That's the game we're playing. But we just need to make sure within what we have and the cards we've been dealt, how do we still continue to address the housing and affordability issue? And I think that goes way beyond just the pace of money supply and the volume of money supply.
What problem are we trying to solve, right? Are we trying to, give a place of home to the needy, right? We are not actually creating flats for storage of, value to make money, to make speculation. That is not the housing, solution. Obviously, when we resolve all the basic housing concern, then yes, you can treat housing as a commodity, but that shouldn't be the starting point at all.
All right, have to draw a line. My sense is, first thing, priorities. Both our speakers agree that we need clear direction, we need clear priorities. So priorities obviously is high on the agenda, but I sense, private rental is something we should be looking at, and clearly is a gap in the matrix. Co-sharing clearly is something which would appeal to a certain gap, certain part of the population. And we need to get public-private collaboration working. It's not working at all. But anyway, thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.